Call halal Yahweh Bashim Navashai Bashim Rakar Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders. Salutations unto all my fellow laborers, the Akim, that go out and do this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so. To the confusion of face brothers that are joined unto our ranks. The hopefully elect, the Akwaf that are listening and learning to you, I say Shalom. This is a scene from a series called The Last Kingdom. And it's like Apostle Tahar, Apostle Kabar has always mentioned, when Esau makes a period piece, they go all out. They get the clothing down to the lingo, the look, everything except aesthetically. Because during this time in Europe, during the time frame that this happened, this battle would have had very little to, if any, so-called white men in it in the first place. This is white superiority, so-called, on display at its fullest. And what they do is they take real-life characters and then just create stories around them and tell them the way that they want to tell them. But all that aside, this is a story about Uhtred, the son of Uhtred, who was supposedly a Saxon. We know that the Saxons were Negroes and not white people at all. History and relics have proved that. Esau has claimed Anglo-Saxon, and they're not. That means the angelic sons of Isaac. And the angelic sons of Isaac were not Edomites at all. And I've provided the proof in many videos of that. The relics, the evidence, the history that they tried to sweep under the rug. But all that aside, during the time that this happened, the majority of the Edomites were still in the Caucasus Mountains. They hadn't come down yet. They had been forced up in the Caucasus Mountains. As a matter of fact, you can get that account in the book of Job, the 30th chapter. And I'll turn to that. Before I read it, I just want to finish this statement that you've often heard the apostles say that Esau reads the Bible, that all these Hollywood directors, they study the Bible intensely, and that's where they get the inspiration for their movies and their characters. And as I watched this show, the spirit, because I had seen it a couple times, and then I get so angry when I see these Edomite faces where there should be Jake faces. I know that the history is fabricated. And often I don't watch these shows, but this one I started watching. And it was spiritual because we were reading the book of Samuel. And as I began to read the book of Samuel, I realized that all the events that were taking place in Samuel were taking place in this show. The coincidence is beyond a coincidence. There is no doubt in my mind that the directors and the writers of this show read the book of Samuel. All right, and maybe other parts of the Bible. But you're looking at warriors preparing for battle. These are Saxon soldiers about to fight Danes, who were the so-called Vikings. All right, and I'm going to, but before I read that, I got ahead of myself, Salaki. Let me jump back. We're talking about Esau being in the mountains. All right, because these, just like in other movies and other battles, Esau always is putting his face in a time period and a place where he does not belong. All right, and the few Edomites that were or may have been around at this time were serfs and servants. They were not warriors and ruling class people and kings. That didn't happen until the medieval time, until the 1500s they came fully into power, 1492. All right, and in the 1500s, during the Renaissance, meaning the rebirth, this is when Esau came into power. All right, and then he started fabricating the art from 500-600 years before this time, as if it was him that was ruling, and it wasn't. But this is Job the 30th chapter, and it says, But now they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set among the flock of my dogs, of the dogs of my flock. It says, Yea, whereunto might the strength of their hands profit me, in whom old age was perished. And that's not the part that I want. I want to go to where they got driven from among men. Salakia. I thought that was in this chapter. Oh, it is. Salakia. Here it is. I found it. I'm going to start at verse 5. It says, they were driven forth from among men. They cried after them as after a thief, to dwell in the cliffs and the valleys, in the caves of the earth and in the rocks. All right? It says cliffs and wadis. I'm going to have to look that word up. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they were gathered. They were the children of fools. Yeah, they were the children of base men. They were viler than the earth. Now I am their song. Yeah, I am their byword, and we are. Negroes, spics, niggas, coons, Mexicans, savages, Indians. All these bywords that have been put on us as a result of them coming back into power. But when it says to dwell in the cliffs of the valleys and the caves of the earth and in the rocks, they went basically back to their habitat because they were originally from Mount Seir, which is their home in the so-called Middle East. And just looking at the infrastructure of how Mount Seir was built up, it's clear and evident that that was the home of the so-called white man, because they still build that way to this very day. All their buildings of significance are built in the same manner. All right. Now to the book of Samuel. I'm going to read a portion of Goliath. All right. And this is Samuel 17th chapter. And I will start the fourth verse. And it says that there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, whose height was 6 cubits in span. He had a helmet. You see the helmet these weird men are wearing? And he was armed with the coat of mail. That's called a chain mail coat. What that guy is wearing. And that guy was pretty big. He was tall and a lot bigger than a lot of the other men. And there were guys in there even a lot larger than this man. But you could see the chainmail, all right? And it says, and the weight of the coat was 5 shekels of brass. So those chainmails was like armor. And if for anyone who doesn't know what chainmail was for, chainmail was to make the blades slide off of you. It wouldn't stop a total thrust, but slashes it would. It would stop it would be more like an impact than a cut. Okay? So the chainmail just made you a little bit more resistance to the slash of a sword, all right, or a spear. Wouldn't necessarily protect you from a full-on thrust, but it did give you a sense of ruggedness in battle, and it was a lot harder to stop you or take you down. All right, and if you notice, you can see the differences in the men, because some of the men have no chainmail. Those are the men of lower ranks and of lesser importance. The chainmail was generally designed for men who had the title Lord or something to that matter. But they get everything right in this show, because the women in this show did call men Lord and men called other men Lord. All right, just as you read in Samuel, the same thing happens. Because when you see Lord in all capital letters, you know, if you learnt, all right, that says Yahweh. That's talking about the Heavenly Father. But when you see Lord in lowercase levels, letters in the book of Samuel, it was talking about a man who had some standing. But I'm going to read a little bit from. I'm gonna start at chapter 29. All right. And it says, now the Philistines gathered all their armies at Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by the fountain of Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by the mountains by the thousands. But David and his men passed on in the reward with Achish. All right. Now, when you go back to and it says, and then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews hear? And Achish unto the princes of the Philistines, is not David the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years, and I have found no fault in him since he fell Salakia unto me to this day? And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, and the princes of the Philistines said unto him, make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us into battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master, should it not be with the heads of these men? So you got to remember here, if you know the story, David fleeing from Saul, trying not to hurt Saul, fled into the land of the Philistines and began to work as a servant, as a warlord servant to this Philistine king named Achish. Okay, that's the same pretense of what happened in this show. In this show, this Uhtred was Saxon born. His father lost in battle and died, and he got captured. And he was raised by the Danes, the so-called Vikings. He was taken as a slave boy, but then the captor who took him was fond of him and made him a son, adopted him and gave him his name. And he grew up with his Dane brother, his Dane sister, and another servant girl who was actually given to him as a woman as he became a man. So he became a great warrior, and he wasn't a large man, but he was very smart, handsome dude, great warrior, all the attributes that you hear about when they talked about David. All right? And the same scenarios were going on throughout it. When you read in this book how these Philistine kings did not want David to fight with them because they were afraid of him, and they were afraid that he would turn and come against them. And one of the kings in this television series, he said that I would rather have Uhtred with me, because one of his wise men on his council said, can he be trusted? He said, well, he said he has proven to be very worthy and very true to his word. And he said, and however he is dangerous, but I'd rather have his sword with me than against me, because he also had a knack to leading other men to greatness in battle. He was a cunning warlord. He understood battle and war and tactics to go along with his great skill. And these are all the attributes of King David. All right. Let me read a little bit more. I just want to close this out. This is chapter 30. And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had invaded the south of Ziklag and spent Ziklag and burned it with fire. And that happened also in this show. When the men left their camp, the enemies attacked it. The enemies led them to war, but the enemies did double back and actually went after their camp of their wives and their women and their children. All right? So when the apostles and the elders would make those statements about how these Hollywood directors read the Bible to get the inspiration from their stories, that's exactly what they do. And I highly suggest that brothers watch this show. It's very, very spiritual, and it gives you a real life experience of how the ancient world was, and how that is the way of the Bible, And once the laws of the Lord are established back in the earth would be this way as it was in this show again. All right. And meaning the mannerisms of people and the way things are going to be dealt with and how the law will be enforced. The law of the Bible finally will be the law of all lands. Okay. But let me continue. And it says, the Amalekites had invaded the south, which of Edomites, so-called white men, and Ziklag was, and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives, and that were in, and they slew not any, either great or small, but carried them all away and went on their way. So they came in, and they basically took all the spoil, took all the women, took all the children. So they were to be slaves and concubines. That was their plan. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives were taken captives, Ahinoam and the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him. And because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man of his son and for his daughters, but David encouraged himself in Yahweh his power. And the same thing happened to Utrecht. All right, things would go wrong, and some of the men wanted to turn on him. So as you begin to watch this show, which I highly suggest, you'll begin to see how it matches up with the scriptures. And like I said, it's a really good spiritual watch anyway, because it's going to prepare you for some of the things that are to come. Because this way of life and the violence that took place in this, and the way the spoil was taken, gives you a real life sense of what happened in the ancient world and what is to happen again upon the return of the Lord. So with that, I hope this was a edifying lesson. Call halal Yahweh Bashim Shai, Bahashim Rakak Wadash, Wa Abba Babal.